The Charge of the Light Brigade by Alfred Lord Tennyson. Now, this poem is based on an incident which occurred in a war which was fought between Russia and Britain from 1854 to 1856. And this war was called the Crimean War. So you can say that this poem is based on a true event. You can also say that it's based on a historical event. So, before we do a line by line interpretation of the poem, let me just give you a brief outline. A brief outline of what exactly happens in the poem. A brief summary of the incident which the poem glorifies in its lines. All right, let's just first focus on the title. Yeah, the title says The Charge of the Light Brigade. Now, let's take the words one by one. Brigade. What do we mean by brigade? Brigade means a group of soldiers. A group of soldiers. And, yeah. And why is this brigade referred to as light? Why do we call it a light brigade? Because these soldiers were carrying only light weapons. Weapons like swords, like sabers, like bayonets. What is a saber? Saber is a kind of a sword. And what is a bayonet? Bayonet is a sword like stabbing blade. So this is what the Light Brigade was carrying. The Light Brigade was not equipped with heavy weapons. Or you can say that they were not armed with guns and artillery like tanks, cannons, or high caliber guns. So, what is a light brigade? Light brigade. What is a light brigade? A light brigade basically means a unit in the army or a battalion carrying only light weapons like sabers, like bayonets. Okay? So this is what a light brigade is. Now, who is the light brigade in this poem? Well, the light brigade in this poem is the British light cavalry force. What is cavalry? Cavalry means soldiers who fight on horseback. So the 600 British horsemen carrying only sabers and bayonets, they form the light brigade in this poem. And what is the meaning of charge? What do we mean by charge? Well, charge means a a violent rush forward for a forceful attack. This is what charge means. So the poem basically means the charge of the 600 horsemen of the British Army carrying only sabers and bayonets in a long valley which was 1.5 miles long, a valley which has been termed as the Valley of Death in this poem. Why? Why this valley has been repeatedly referred to as the Valley of Death? Well, let me explain it to you. Try to visualize this in your minds. This is a valley, okay? And this is 1.5 miles long. Now, this valley was dotted with Russian cannons on both the sides. Okay? On this side, we have the Light Brigade, the 600 British horsemen carrying only light weapons. And on this side of the valley, we have the Russian soldiers equipped with guns and heavy artillery. And on both the sides of the valley, as I told you, both the sides were dotted with Russian cannons. So, from this end, the Light Brigade launches an attack. As soon as they receive the order of their commander, they launch an attack. They rush forward. They charge straight into the Valley of Death, a valley which spelled death for them, where death was waiting for them. The 1.5 miles long valley belonged to none other than death. Now, death, if you see here, the first letter has been capitalized, which means this is a personification because, well, another reason why it's a personification is that death has been given a life-like quality of owning a piece of land. What do I mean by this? Well, as we'll do the poem line by line, we will understand why this valley is called the Valley of Death. Well, you must understand that there are some people, some grammarians who call this word a poem and some people call it a poem. So I've done a little bit of my research on this. I think both are correct. All right, now let's begin with the first stanza. Half a league onward, all in the valley of death, rode the 600. Now, 1 league means 3 miles. So the valley was somewhere around 1.5 miles long. Half a league. All right. So the valley where they charged through, where the Light Brigade charged through, was 1.5 miles long, and the poem begins with a war scene. The poem begins with a war scene. The very opening of the poem sets a kind of a rhythm which is very similar to a military march, like left, right, left, left, right, left. Similarly, the poem begins with half a league, half a league, half a league. So a rhythm is set in the very beginning itself, depicting a war scene and creating an image of a war in the minds of a reader, a technique adopted by the poet to make the readers come alive with the setting and the action of the poem. All in the Valley of Death rode the 600. So all the 600 British soldiers rode into the Valley of Death. Now, Valley of Death is a personification because death has been given a lifelike quality of owning a piece of land. All right, just like, we say house of Mr. Alfred, farm of Mr. Gary, similarly, valley of Mr. Death. D, as you can see, has been capitalized here. A proper noun, it's treated as a proper noun here. So this is a personification because death has been personified by giving it a lifelike quality of owning a piece of land. All right. Forward the Light Brigade. Forward the Light Brigade. Well, the leader, their leader or their commander is now giving them order. Charge for the guns. aim for the guns. Go ahead, move forward, take down the guns. Now don't forget that these 600 soldiers are not carrying any guns. They only have sabers. They only have swords and bayonets. And immediately, without a second thought, what did they do? Well, not flinching even for a moment, these 600 horsemen charged. They bolted, all 600 of them rode into the valley of death. So, this is our first stanza. I told you there is a personification here, valley of death. Apart from that, you can say this is a repetition. And there's another line. I think it's, yeah, rode the 600. Now, this is a refrain. Now, what is the refrain and why this is a refrain? I'll discuss it in the second stanza. So, let's begin with the second stanza. Yes, forward the light brigade. Now, the order of their commander is repeated here. You can see this line in the first stanza also. Now, this repetition further emphasizes the fact that these soldiers are being sent to their doom, to their ruin, to their death. Forward, the Light Brigade. Was there a man dismayed? Now, the speaker or the poet asks, was there a man, was there any soldier dismayed? Dismayed. What is the meaning of dismayed? Dismayed means to lose courage, to be overcome by terror, by fear, by sadness. So, this is the question which the speaker asks. Was there any soldier who lost courage, who was overcome by terror, fear, or sadness, or who expressed alarm or shock or fear? Because such a reaction would have been perfectly understandable in such a situation. So, was there a man dismayed? Not. Not here means no. There was not even a single soldier who was dismayed. These men, these soldiers were too tough, too loyal to feel dismayed. Though the soldiers knew, though the soldier knew someone had blundered. Now, although these soldiers knew that this order was a death sentence for them, they were aware of the fact that this order was a blunder. The soldiers were not dumb. They knew that this order was not a result of a rightfully planned strategy. It was a blunder. It was a mistake. Someone had made a mistake. All right. Now, that mistake could be an error of judgment. It could be some miscommunication, and it could also be some miscalculation on the part of their commander. Otherwise, why the soldiers carrying only sabers and bayonets would be expected to take on the enemies who were so heavily equipped with guns and artillery? Now, let's see the next three lines. There's not to make reply, there's not to reason why, there's but to do and die. Now, these three lines sum up the honest and humble heroism, the honest and humble heroism of these men. Their duty does not permit them to make reply, to talk back to their commander, to refuse to obey his command. Their duty does not permit them to do so. Their duty does not even permit them to reason with their commander. They cannot negotiate with him. They don't have the authority to question their commander's orders or his judgment. They cannot persuade him to change or rethink his decision. All they can do, there's but to do and die. All they can do is ride and fight in this situation. That is only what they can do. Do and die. Do and die, I'm sorry, here is an alliteration. Now, what is an alliteration? Alliteration is the repetition of the same sound. Do and die. D, D. All right. So, because a soldier must follow the command, the order of his senior, and if need arises, be ready to sacrifice his own life. And this is exactly what these men do. Into the valley of death rode the 600. So very boldly, very courageously, very boldly, very courageously, very bravely, they moved forward and rode straight into the valley of death. Now, this personification is repeated here. All right? Okay. Rode the 600. Now, this, as I told you, it was there in the first stanza also, that this is a refrain. Now, what is a refrain? Refrain is when a line or lines are repeated periodically, especially towards the end of a stanza in a poem. It's called a refrain. A refrain is basically like a chorus in a song. It emphasizes the main action of the poem, which in this poem is the charge of the British Army into the Valley of Death. This refrain also gives a rhythm, a pulse, a beat to the poem, just like a song. All right. So here, what are the figures of speech? I just told you there is a refrain. This is a refrain. This is an alliteration. All right. Okay. Now let's move on to the third stanza. Now this video is part 1 of this poem. For the rest of the poem, please refer to my next video. We'll cover the rest of the stanzas in the next video. Thank you so much.